Another day, another drama. Hello and welcome back to Sorry What. We have a two-part story today, friends, but don't worry because the second part will be posted tomorrow. Scorched Earth Revenge connoisseurs, this one's for you. Fair warning, I tried to post something different for today's story. If you've ever wanted to see Scorched Earth in all its glory, strap yourself in because we're diving right into the drama. Sarah stood up as Tom Whitmer, the senior account analyst, was running through her section sales figures, and he failed to respond to her first question. I'm sorry Tom, for once you have made a mistake. My own calculations show you are 5% adrift on our figures. Yes, there. You haven't included the new account for Rowlinson's. It's the biggest single order from a new account we've ever had. Tom was slightly flustered, not used to being challenged so directly. He tapped away on his laptop, apologizing somewhat sheepishly, once he realized his error. Sarah ran her hand across the side of her forehead, pushing her long blonde hair down, as her hand moved away. She smiled at Tom, then sat back down around the table, the smile indicating a small victory over someone that didn't usually take prisoners. Sue sat in the canteen with her lunch as Sarah appeared to breeze in, watching her smiling and chatting as she moved through the queue gathering her food and drink before sashaying over to her friend. Oh my god Sarah, I couldn't believe what you did earlier. You were so confident when you stood and tackled Tom. We've seen him rip the most hardened sales rep to shreds before, yet he rolled over like a kitty cat when you challenged him. They both chuckled as they began eating lunch. After a few minutes, Sue noticed her friend seemed slightly different, happier, and she looked like her thoughts were elsewhere. Sarah's lips occasionally curled up slightly into a discreet smile. I don't know, you took on Tom and swatted him away. You walked through the canteen with a definite sway to your hips, and you're sitting here, with your mind drifting off somewhere pleasant. You're like the cat that got the cream. Sarah pursed her lips, then looked around to make sure they couldn't be overheard. She leaned in towards Sue, who followed suit. She could see this could be some juicy news or gossip. When Sarah did start to speak, it was slow with a sexy tone about her. Yes, you're quite right. This kitty's had helpings of single cream, double cream plus some clotted cream to boot. Sarah laughed. The tone hinted at mischievousness as Sue looked at her quizzically. The statement didn't make any sense to her. Just at the point she was going to ask a question, Sarah beat her to it. Tell me Sue, do I seem any different to you today? If so, why do you think that it is? You do seem more confident. Your walk, it's got a certain gait to it. You've got an air of, I don't know, sexy superiority. Yes, not smug, like you could take charge of anything thrown your way like how you pulled Tom up earlier. Sarah nodded, accepting the comment. So, the second part of my question, why? Why do you think I'm different from last week? I don't know, when I said you look like the cat that got the cream said you'd had a mixture of cream. I don't know what you mean by that. Sarah leant in so her lips were almost touching Sue's ear and whispered to her. Tony gave me a helping of single cream Friday, Saturday and last night plus, 2 hot-bodied guys. Let's just say they gave me a good helping of double cream on Thursday night. Yes, I've also had more than my fair share of clotted cream to swallow too. Sarah pulled back, her expression said how about that then with a cheeky smirk plastered across her face. She resumed eating her lunch as Sue looked at her stunned by the revelation. Leaning forward as far as she could towards her friend, she whispered a response. You are joking, right? You're saying you made love to 2 men when you were away last Thursday night, then made love to Tony the following 3 nights. Is he okay with what you've done? Sarah put her knife and fork down, then waved a hand as if dismissing part of Sue's comment. She checked to see that nobody was within earshot before speaking to Sue again. You want the lowdown, here we go. No, those 2 men didn't make love to me. They ducked me like I've never been ducked before. Then, she let a low throaty laugh slip from her lips. Then after they ducked me, I ducked them until they were both spent, with nothing left to give me. Now, how's that for a 43-year-old wife with 2 teenage kids? I made 2 30-something-year-olds day, or should I say night. But what about Tony? What did he say? Sue's eyes were now wide, her mouth hung open at the shock of Sarah's confession. Tony was fine with it. I mean, he doesn't know what happened, but when I dragged him up to bed on Friday night when I got home, he reaped all the rewards, and then some. It was at that point their friend Rose came and joined them. The discussion turned to work and general office gossip before they returned to work. Sue could hardly concentrate during the afternoon. Initially she thought Sarah was pulling her leg, but she quickly came to the conclusion she was telling the truth. She now understood the analogy to cream. She was referring to the men coming, then there was the comment about clotted cream. The thought didn't sit well with her. She may give her husband blue jobs, but she never swallowed. The taste was unpleasant to her, and yet Sarah had implied she had swallowed. Did she mean from each man? She would have to find out more. What possessed Sarah to do it? Is it something she's always done, and Sue had been blind as to what her friend was doing? Before she knew it, it was time to go home. At home she couldn't get Sarah's confession out of her mind. What did she do? Just walk up to two men in the hotel and ask if they would take her to bed. In the room, did they take turns? Did the other one watch? It was just so alien to her. She had met her husband in college, they were both V-card holders, and both had gone out with people before getting together. Sue had had a few fumbles in parked cars, even let someone put their hand inside her knickers as she stroked him, but it didn't last long. It was literally a couple minutes before he finished, and it splashed all over her black dress. She didn't realize it would dry out so quickly and be glaring obvious as to what it was. It was slightly slower with Dave, there was some kissing and cuddling, but he remained a gentleman. 6 months into their relationship, he took her out for a romantic meal and popped the question. She agreed, and they were making love in a hotel room later that night for the first time. He was caring and compassionate, she knew he was the man for her. Since that night 23 years ago, Dave had been the only man who had ever made love to her. He told her he loved her as much today as when they first met, and every time they made love, it was the best feeling in the world. As for other women, he had always been faithful. She once found a Corno magazine hidden in his drawer when she was pregnant with Chloe. He apologized over and over. On the cover was the picture of a woman that had a passing resemblance to Sue, and since sex had been difficult during her pregnancy, he had taken the magazine into the bathroom when he struggled. Sue was initially upset, but actually came to feel quite proud of herself. He was masturbating to a picture of a woman who was simply somebody that she saw as a lesser version of herself, a poor substitute. Her answer was to ensure that he would receive plenty of hand relief, and the odd blue job to help her husband remain healthy. In bed that night she rolled onto her side, her fingers stroking and her mouth trailing kisses down Dave's body. This is a pleasant surprise. It's not normal for you to feel frisky on a Monday night. Something got your motor running today. Sue thought about telling him about Sarah, but decided on a different tack. I had a sexy dream last night, a vivid, dirty, sexy dream, and I'll admit, it's turned me on. Dave gently took her hand from his hardening clock and rolled onto his side, facing her. Just when I think you could never surprise me, you pull something out of the hat. Do you want to talk about? If you don't, it's not a problem, we all dream. Sue decided to go for it. She had a plan. I dreamt I was in a hotel, dressed up because you promised me the hottest night of my life. You told me where to go, which room to check into and how to dress. Then I was to wait for you in the bar. This does sound good, and pray tell, how had I asked you to dress? You asked me to dress like a high-end escort that works from head to toe. Sue noticed his breathing deepen. She felt good about where this was going. So, what happened in your dream? Sue continued, her voice low and sultry. I stepped into the bar, it was filled with businessmen socializing. I felt hungry eyes devouring me as I sat up on a bar-side stool. A quick flash of my stocking tops only fueled their lustful gazes. What happened when I arrived? Sue knew this is where he could balk. Moving down, she pushed him gently so he was on his back, then took his clock in her mouth. Barely able to speak, he urged her to continue, but didn't make it clear if he meant the story or the blue job. She was going to alternate between the two. The thing is, Dave, you messaged me. The car had broken down on the motorway, and you'd been told by the AA you had a long wait. You told me to use the room and you would get the car home with the AA and come and meet me in the morning. What did you do? I was in a quandary. For over a week you'd been teasing me, telling me of all the wicked and wanton things you planned to do to me. In my dream you spent the week egging me on, but never pushing it further. You left me high and dry in the hotel bar, hornier than I've ever been, with a room full of hungry men. You left me, Dave, left me amongst a pack of wolves. One finally comes over, a good-looking man like you. One drink later, we are arm in arm walking to what should be our room. Please tell me you didn't, please tell me you came to your senses. Reaching down, she gripped his clock and was soon riding him. Within a minute she carried on where she'd left off, relaying the supposed dream to Dave, but it was now a breathy whisper, interspersed with deep breaths, as her lungs fought to find sufficient air to support the hard and fast pace she'd set. I needed it. As soon as the lift door closed, he clumped his mouth over mine, his hand on my melons. And I wanted it. I needed it. We barely made it into the room before he started to strip the dress from me, his eyes feasting on the expensive lingerie that was supposed to be for you, but now it was for him. He pushed me back on the bed and mounted me, his big clock, an intenso cut off the rest of her words. Never in her life had she finished so hard or violently, and her O tipped Dave over the edge right after her. It was short and intense. They both lay looking at the ceiling, gulping to draw in air as if the room was devoid of oxygen. That was unexpected. And incredibly cheap. If you have any more kinky dreams like that, I've not a problem if you share them, especially if we both come like that. All Sue could do was mutter a huh, as her heart rate climbed back down from the dizzy rate it had been beating. It wasn't long before Dave was snoring gently, but she couldn't sleep. Was that how Sarah felt when two strangers ducked her? She had just felt as if every fiber in her body had experienced sexual bliss simultaneously, and it was incredible. Had Sarah experienced some form of sexual nirvana beyond this last Thursday night? Dave was up and gone before she was up the next morning. It wasn't often she didn't stir when he awoke for work, but today was one of those days. As she showered, soaping away the excesses of the night before her fingers slipped between her kitty lips, she felt sure they were still puffy, although it could have been her imagination. As she drove to work, she felt content, elated even. She wanted to have a further chat with Sarah, seek her views on what and why. She looked forward to their lunchtime natter. Just gone 11 a.m., a woman walked into the office to deliver a large bouquet of flowers. All the women looked up, curious as to who the lucky recipient was going to be. Stopping at the first desk she came to, the delivery woman spoke to the woman sitting there who then pointed over to Sue. To Sue's surprise, they were for her, a wholly unexpected delivery of an expensive bouquet. Looking around the office, there were either envious or inquisitive looks from her fellow workers. Looking over at Sarah, she could see her smiling with an expression that told Sue she was itching to find out what the hell the flowers were all about. The card attached to the flowers was puzzling. All it had written was Molps, love DXXX. Molps, what the hell did that mean? She found a suitable container to put the flowers in with some water, and went back to work. As soon as lunchtime arrived, Sarah made a beeline for Sue. Well, what the heck has Dave done to warrant sending you flowers? Been a naughty boy, has he? Sarah was probing, having formulated the conclusion Dave was groveling to Sue for some sort of misdeed. Sue thought she would have some fun. Oh yes, he was bad alright. He let me duck another man last night with his blessing. Sarah's mouth dropped and hung open in surprise. How on earth, how could she find someone so quickly? Sue pressed on whilst she still had the element of surprise on her side. Taking a leaf from Sarah's approach from the previous day, Sue leant in somewhat conspiratorially, so only Sarah could hear Sue speaking. He let me take a man to a hotel room last night, and he let him duck me hard, all night long. Sue thought of the saying a picture speaks 1,000 words, and Sarah had pictured Sue in a room much like she herself was the week before. Pulling back from Sarah, Sue noted that Sarah looked dumbstruck, as if her brain had disengaged itself from the rest of her. After a few seconds the words came. OMG, how? How did you organize something like that so quickly? Where was Dave? I mean, how the duck did he agree to let you do it? Of all the people I know, he's the last man that I would have thought would be accepting of that. Damn girl, I'm in awe and you have my full respect. The girls high-fived before Sue started laughing. She then spilled the beans on what had actually occurred, but also discussed how it had been the most intense sexual experience she had ever felt. You've given me an idea. I'll try the same approach with Tony. The goal will be to get him on board, get permission to do it, then I won't need to wait until I'm away. As for you Sue, you part way there. If you think your role-playing was hot, you wait until you try it for real. Honestly, it's like an addictive drug. You just said when I do it, I never said I would do it for real. Sarah laughed. Really? Look what you did last night, simply from our conversation yesterday. When you were describing last night, your eyes shone with lust. We both know you want it, and at some point, you'll try it, trust me. As the day before, their friend Tracy joined them, stifling further conversation, but Sue was already wondering how exciting it would be for real. She asked both the women if they knew what MOLPS stood for. An earlier internet search only came up with some sort of illness. They all had no idea, but were curious what it meant. She would ask Dave later. On Friday, she received a text from Dave early in the morning, not long after she had sat at her desk. He would be late home and expected to see her dressed exactly as she had described in her dream to him on the Monday. Making a game of it, he told her he would finally tell her what MOLPS meant. When she kissed and thanked him for the flowers Tuesday evening, he laughed when she begged to know what it meant. He promised to tell her once she proved to him it was apt. It annoyed her, but she could see it was also part of this new sexual chemistry that was forming between them both. Sue looked at herself in the mirror. Dressed in a little short dress with some black lingerie underneath, she had gone into town during lunch Friday, and brought some impossibly high black stiletto shoes that she swore she would never wear outside of her home, and never likely outside of the bedroom. Her makeup was heavy, at least for her, and a deep red lip gloss created a sticky coating that made her lips stick together. As Dave pulled up and let himself in, she sat at the breakfast bar with a gin and tonic for herself, plus a rum and coke poured for Dave. With the lights set low, Dave walked in. Seeing his wife sitting striking a provocative pose at the breakfast bar, he dropped into the role he had set himself up for. Hi, is anyone sitting here? If not, do you mind if I join you? Sue sat looking at him, sucking hard on the straw in her drink, causing the walls to contract, restricting the drink from flowing. She looked at his face knowing he would associate her hollow cheeks as she sucked on the straw to his clock receiving similar treatment. She was enjoying playing along. No, feel free, my husband had just ordered drinks, and he was called away on a work emergency, so he suggested I finish mine before deciding what to do. Will he mind if I drink it, rather than it go to waste? No, he hates things going to waste, especially expensive things. Dave took a couple of gulps from the glass before speaking. Talking of expensive things, what were you and your husband's plans for tonight? I'm not sure I should tell you. He brought me here to duck my brains out. He's been promising all week to rock my world. Sue and Dave continued this roleplay until they ended up in bed. For the next hour or more they moved through several unrehapped acts, sometimes ducking, sometimes exploring each other with their mouths or simply using fingers and hands. All throughout, the role-playing continued ensuring that they remained on the sexual high it had drawn from both of them. Eventually they were done, completely shattered and drained by the unprecedented night of passion. This time they managed to shower before going to sleep, cuddling up as they whispered sweet nothings to each other before drifting off to sleep. As they lay in bed Saturday morning, both deep in their own thoughts about the night before, Dave decided to offer the chance to ramp up the experience. Honey, let's do this for real. Sorry. Let's do this for real. The hotel room, dressing like an escort, being picked up at the bar, then ducked senseless back in the room. Oh my god. Are you serious? Can we really give it a try? He looked at her face and could see a mixture of joy and lust in her face. Her breathing quickened, and her nip started to harden. Yes, let's make a weekend of it. Book somewhere nice where we can enjoy the day, then we can act out a fantasy at night where I pick you up at the bar. Oh. Yes, that'd be nice. Dave sat up quickly in the bed. He immediately picked up on the initial tone of disappointment in her voice before she tried to recover, likely understanding that they may have been on different pages. He noticed she was looking down, away from him. Sue, look at me. Please tell me you weren't thinking about making this a reality, rather than role-playing. Sue lifted her head, swallowed and bit her upper lip. I'm sorry Dave, this has me all so confused. I thought that may have been what you wanted too. Whoa up there. This was your dream, your fantasy that started all of this. I mean, Duck, it's been like we've rebooted our sex life and then ramped it up a couple of gears. Yes, I've really gotten into it, but there's no way on God's earth I would ever consider sharing you with another man, woman, or even extraterrestrial if they turned up. You need to wipe away any notion of that happening this very second. In fact, maybe we should try and blank this whole episode out of our lives. It will never happen, Sue, period. Sue could see the anger simmering in his eyes. She acted contrite. She had been so convinced Dave was so far into it. The idea of another man ducking her would allow the chance for her to exult in the same feelings of sexual release that Sarah made abundantly clear she had received with her extramarital activities. She had to now work hard to undo the damage done in that short sentence that had slipped from her lips. I'm so sorry Dave, of course I understand. We are both molded together as one. Our wedding vows made that clear. Please forgive me, it was just a silly thought because of my heightened sexual state you put me in. You're right, let's drop this game, at least for a while. The rest of the weekend had them both on edge. Dave, now suspicious, was his wife trying to somehow play him into doing something that she wanted, that until recently he was clueless about. Had she harbored those thoughts all along, and only felt comfortable enough now to broach the subject with him? He decided to be less trusting, now actively look for signs that she may be wanting something outside of her marriage. As for Sue, she could see him brooding. No doubt he now felt that she had a plan that she had tried to implement and had backfired. When she thought about it, maybe that's exactly what her subconscious self had tried to do. She would play it cool, not be sexually aggressive, and in no uncertain terms make out that anyone other than her husband could duck her. The cogs in her mind whirred around looking at how she could tackle the problem. When Sue returned to work on Monday, Sarah couldn't wait. Her own good news gushed from her mouth over a tea break. He went for it. I used your trick of pretending to have this fantasy about being ducked by a stranger after Tony stood me up in a hotel during our Friday night session, and I went all out slot on him. Sarah went on to tell Sue how she convinced Tony to join a swingers club, adding how Sue was a genius to come up with that ruse. Eventually, she noticed that Sue wasn't smiling. In fact, she looked quite sad. Are you okay, sweetie? Sue sniffed. She managed to stop the tear that was forming full from her eye. I took up Sarah. We got to a point where I thought Dave wanted it too. When he suggested we book a room to try out the experience, he picked up on my disappointment when I realized he was talking about simply expanding the role-play acting between the two of us. He made it clear, in no uncertain terms, any notion of anyone becoming a third wheel in our relationship, even a one-nighter, is a big no-no. I just have to accept, it isn't going to happen for me as it has for you. She sniffed again, the tears were forming, and she used a finger to wipe them away before they fell. Look, leave it for a while. In a week or so pick another sexy dream scenario. I dunno, maybe you're the domestic servant. Go buy a maid's outfit, maybe a college girl, none even. Make sure it's not another man, but your supposed dream centers around him, not necessarily as your husband, but as your master. Restore the dent in his ego first. In a few months we all have to go on that 3 days training course for the new software system. If you really want it, that'll be your chance. I'll help you, make sure you don't slip up. Over the next month, Sue followed Sarah's advice. It started off as the housemaid. She even ordered a collar and leash, so Dave knew he was the master. It was a little slow at first, but they found the mojo that had when they had pretended another man was ducking her outside of her marriage. The status quo was restored. At work, Sarah gushed over Tony letting her be ducked by other men in hotels. She would act out the scene as Sue had supposedly dreamed it. She would hook up with a guy on the pretext her husband had stood her up because of work, and she was horny as hell. After the deed was done, she would usher the guy out and her husband come and join her from the bar to reclaim her in the same room. After repeating the scene a few more times, without discussing it with her husband, she took 2 men to the room for a threesome. Because they had pushed it so far already, and she was as rampant as ever after they left, she laid out a scenario to Sue where their marriage had been seriously enhanced by the shenanigans, and their sex life had exploded like Mount Vesuvius, making them both extremely happy. Sue cursed that Dave couldn't see the gains they were missing out on. 3 months later Sue was due to go away on the training course for 3 days, meaning she needed to stay away from home in a hotel. When she told Dave, she could see he was uncomfortable with it. She put the plan into place to placate him as suggested by Sarah. Dave, I need to pack for my course. Why don't you come upstairs so we can keep chatting as I'll be away, and I'm not looking forward to not being with you, so the more we can connect before tomorrow, the happier I'll feel. Dave sat on the bed as she packed. She could see he was scrutinizing the clothing and toiletries she was packing. She had deliberately packed the most boring and unsexy clothes she owned, plus what she called her granny pants and bras, which she tended to wear when she was menstruating. To add to the clothes, she made a point of tipping the toiletries bag on the bed. She knew there was a bottle of perfume in there from when they were last away together, and she wanted to make a show of leaving it behind. When she took the case downstairs, she could see Dave relax. The fear he still held that she may want to live out her fantasy dispelled. One first evening in the hotel, she made a point of calling Dave as she was eating dinner in the hotel restaurant with some of the other female employees undergoing the training. She panned the mobile camera around, so Dave could see there were 5 women dressed very conservatively, and were all, like her, in their mid-40s or older. They all waved at Dave and told him that Sue was lucky to have such a good-looking man as Dave. She rounded off the call telling him she would call him later when she was back in the room. By 9:30 she was in her plain cotton nightie, laying in the bed with the TV on. She called Dave in a video call again, and they spoke for around 20 minutes before she yawned several times, telling him she was tired from the traveling and intensity of the course. After blowing each other kisses and declaring their love for each other and the call ended, Sue jumped straight out of bed. Removing the nightie revealed a black bra, skimpy black panties and sheer black nylon hold-up stockings, which would be joined by the new little black dress she had secretly purchased. Spending 20 minutes on her hair and makeup before putting on the high black shiny stilettos she had brought and worn for her husband, she looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she admiring the hot MILF that reflected back at her, a MILF that could easily be mistaken for a high-end escort. She smiled to herself. Thanks to Sarah's cunningness, she had told Dave she would have assignments to do, so she needed to drag her work laptop along with her. That wasn't the case. The laptop was stowed safely at work. The bag contained all of the things she had just used or worn that Dave didn't need to know about. Sarah, once again, was right. He would be suspicious of the contents of her suitcase. To allay his fears, it was packed in front of him, but she never touched the laptop case that was packed when he was out in the garage the previous evening. She had even gone as far as buying some similar second-hand heels from a charity shop. They weren't her size, but it didn't matter. If Dave went snooping in her wardrobe, he would see some shoes that he assumed were her duck me shoes she wore for him, unaware they were with her having traveled in the laptop bag. As she walked with a sexy sway to her hips into the bar area at 10:20 in the evening, she started to have second thoughts, and noticed she was shaking. She decided not to sit on a stool as Sarah had suggested, but sat at a table. If anything, she was trying to be inconspicuous. After 10 minutes, an identical drink that she had ordered herself was brought over by the barman. He pointed at a guy standing watching them at the bar as to the person who had purchased it, and took the fact she looked his way as his cue to come over. Doug was his name and joined Sue at her table. They sat and chatted for around 20 minutes, then she felt his shoe gently nudge her ankle under the table, and rub itself on her lower leg. With that she thanked him for the drink and company, stating she had had a long day, and needed to get some rest for an early start. As she walked away, her heart was pounding hard in her chest, and it wasn't until she reached the lift she realized she had been holding her breath the minute she had said goodnight to Doug. Once in the room, she leaned back against the closed door. Instead of the fear came a new emotion, raw lust. Doug was good looking, at least 10 years younger than her, and he was obviously game. In the morning, she set her alarm for 2 minutes after Dave's alarm sounded back at home, and video called him. Both bleary, she made sure he caught sight of her plain nightie, and that the bed had clearly been slept in by a single occupant. She detected no worry from Dave. He seemed convinced that those thoughts she had had were now forgotten. The evening meal followed the same pattern. She even passed the phone to one of the women, who cackled as she told Dave she was going to beg Sue to lend him out to her, as she missed having a man since her husband had left her. It was said in jest, but Sue felt that the woman would happily take her up on the offer if it was made. Following the same pattern as the night before, at 10:30 Sue was back in the bar, checking to make sure that none of the women from work were still there. This time she followed the instructions from Sarah and sat on a stool at the bar, making sure that the guys there had a good look at her legs and stocking tops as she sat down. Unlike the night before, there were no takers. She realized that some big football match was being played abroad involving an English club, and it had gone to extra time. She went back upstairs cursing that she hadn't pushed home the night before. The following day played out the same. It was just like the film Groundhog Day, except she knew this was the last night. If there were no takers, she may ask the barman what time his shift finished, although he only looked to be in his early 20s. This time, within 5 minutes of sitting on a stool, a tall, good-looking man came and sat next to her. This one was a similar age to her, well-dressed, well-spoken, and he smelled nice. She was pleased to see he sported a wedding ring too. They chit-chatted about why they were there. His name was Rob, and he was a salesman for some sort of electronics company. Sarah told her that what you did not do was to discuss home life. That was the big no-no, especially discussing spouses. It was important to make sure they were married though, make sure a ring was visible. That way, they both had something to lose if it went wrong, and the chances of STD were practically zero, as nobody wanted to bring a nasty bug home, so married people were almost certainly going to be clean. That piece of advice from Sarah certainly made sense. Over the next hour they drank cocktails and she flirted with him shamelessly. She spun on the stool slightly so he could clearly see her stocking tops. After visiting the gents, he pulled his own stool in closer so he could surreptitiously put a hand on her leg, gently letting his fingers go back and forth, each time edging millimeter by millimeter higher, until his finger brushed her soft skin, even just touching the bottom of her panties. Then the moment came, whose room they were going to. They elected to go to her room. As soon as the lift door closed, his mouth was on hers with an urgency that surprised her. All throughout the earlier liaison he had been as cool as a cucumber, the perfect suave married gentleman she had anticipated, but now he was like a ravenous lion, and it made her tummy flutter, and her kitty soak the already damp panties. They got down to business as soon as they got inside a room. As time went on he pushed harder and became rougher. She put her hands on his thighs to try and make him back off, but with his hands behind her head she couldn't stop him. He spoke to her with a raspy voice. "This is what you wanted, to be taken by a man, be his plaything. If you wanted lovey-dovey you would have stayed at home with hubby. You know you want this, I'll prove it to you right now." With that he stopped and she gulped air in as she coughed and sputtered, tears streaming from her eyes mixed in with the mascara as they ran down her face. Reaching down and gripping her on the side of her chest, he pulled her upright, then jammed a hand under her dress, pushing 2 fingers into the sticky mess between her legs. "There, you want this. If you didn't you wouldn't be dripping like a waterfall. You wouldn't have sat on that stool dressed up this late at night. You wouldn't have eaten a meal with friends as a plain Jane, before reappearing later looking like a slut. No, not looking like a slut, being a slut. Don't deny what you are." Reaching down he pulled the dress quickly up and over her body, throwing it on the floor like discarded trash. Then he picked her up and walked to the bed before throwing her down onto it. Her heart was pounding with the mixed emotions of fear and sexual excitement. At first she was enjoying the mixture of pain and pleasure he was giving her, until that evolved into just being painful. Sue tried to get Rob off her and finally succeeded after much effort. "What the duck are you playing at? Please back off. I didn't ask for you to do this. I have to go home to my husband." When she looked at him, his face was a sneer. Gone was the suave, sophisticated man from earlier. He flipped her body over onto her front as she started to struggle against him. "Calm down, slut. We came up here to have some fun, remember? You've just come hard twice in just a few minutes. You've squirted all over the bed. Duck, you've really got me turned on now. Admit it, you love it. You've no control. It's what sluts love." Kneeling back on the bed he pulled her hips back, so her peach was up in the air, as one hand pushed her upper torso back down, so her head and face were on the bedsheet. She was getting back on board with what Rob was doing until she felt his finger forcing its way in her back hole. She started to panic. Please no, not there, you're too big. I don't do that, my husband will know. TSK, I'll go slow, just the tip I promise, trust me you'll love it. With that he pushed his head against the tightly clenched ring of muscle. She was whimpering no, but there was a part of her that wanted it, the last taboo, letting a stranger take her back passage. Before she thought about relaxing her muscles to try, he leant forward so his hands could reach round under her bra and pinched hard. As she yelled, it made her relax enough for him to push past the restrictive ring that now made way for him. Her yell quickly turned into a sharp intake of air. Please, please, go slow, treat me as if I'm your wife. He laughed, but it sounded callous rather than jovial. You want me to duck your peach, imagining you are my wife. I never said I was married. But you're wearing a wedding ring. Oh that. I wear it to remind myself what a skanky cheating 2-bit slut I was married to, and not to ever fall for it again. Like you right now, I wasn't enough for her so she went looking elsewhere, random hookups to scratch her itch. When I found out I gave her something to scratch alright, I ducked her peach and kitty almost raw, then threw her out onto the street. If you want the ex-wife experience, then here it comes. Leaning forward to push her down, her shriek was stifled by her head being buried into the bedding. The pain she felt was indescribable. She wanted him to stop and threatened him with desperate measures. Please, stop, you're hurting me. If you don't slow down or stop, I'll start screaming grape. I will, please, please slow down. Aware it would bring unwanted attention, he did slow down, released the nips, then put his hands on her hips. He could feel her grip him tightly, and he kept moving back and forth for a few minutes longer until he had his own release. He preferred it when he could ram away, but not today, he'd had his fun. Without a further word, he stood up, pulled up his pants and trousers which hadn't been fully removed, buttoned his shirt, then walked out without a further word. All told, 15 minutes had passed since they entered the room. Sue lay face down, humiliated and questioning how it had gone so wrong. A few minutes later she started to sob, comprehending she had been foolhardy and irresponsible to go ahead with the plan. Right now she wished she was at home, with her Dave's arms wrapped around her. As she lay there regretting her actions, there was a soft knock on the door. She assumed he had returned. Without getting off the bed she shouted out. Go away. I made a mistake tonight, I should never have let you touch me. It was a woman's voice that answered. Excuse me, this is the hotel duty manager, will you please open the door? There has been a report of concern regarding the welfare of a person in this room. I need to confirm everything is alright. Not wanting any further escalation, Sue picked up a robe and wrapped it around her before answering the door. With red tear-stained eyes, made worse by the ruined makeup through crying, the duty manager was extremely concerned. There was also the unmistakable smell of recent sexual activity in the air. Seeing that nobody else was inside the room, she asked the security guard that had accompanied her to wait outside the room. Do I need to call the police or get you an ambulance? Sue burst into tears. She understood what the manager had perceived had happened by Sue's appearance. No, please don't call anybody, it was simply a misunderstanding. My friend led me to believe I would have an experience to treasure for the rest of my life. It feels more like I've made myself a nightmare I'll never escape from. Sitting on the bed, the manager put her arm around Sue, doing her best to comfort her. Whilst not an everyday occurrence, it happened far more regularly than most people imagined. Why did people that seemed rational and in charge of their thoughts do this to themselves? Was their relationship so bad at home that they felt the need to do this? Surely, just splitting up and getting divorced first took away the guilt they would have to carry. She shook her head, making sure that the crying woman didn't see her do it. Sue gave a clipped version of what had happened, how the guy got too carried away, and she threatened to cry grape, even though it wasn't. She had let him in the room willingly to have sex with a stranger that had got slightly out of hand. Convinced the woman was telling the truth and was, by and large, okay, she got up to leave. Sue had found out that a couple passing by had heard the commotion, picked up on the word grape, and reported it to front desk. Sue then realized it could be a problem. The room was booked in her company's name. They had a strict policy regarding acceptable behavior, whilst staying away at the company's expense. They had a policy where they expected any hotel to report any incidents regarding rooms booked against the company to them. After breaking down crying again, the woman felt Sue had suffered enough and said she would make it go away. With that she left Sue, who had little sleep through the remainder of her troubled night in bed. That's it for part 1, friends. Stay tuned for part 2 tomorrow, where Sue finds out the real meaning of duck around and find out. Make sure to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the exciting conclusion to our story. Go do it now, because trust me, you don't want to miss part 2.